Hello, welcome to Jazz Is
Jazz's
MasterClass series
at the National Jazz Museum at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem.
I am Sekou McMiller, the curator of special projects.
My name is Albert Marquez, Zach O'Farrell.
My name is Shirazette Titten.
And we are in conversation with the legendary Bertha Hope. Jazz could only have happened here in America.
The key to everything was the radio.
So this world is too dense. 15 minutes isn't enough to cover it all.
Are you ready? I am.
As you've seen in some of the other MasterClass series when you spoke about the music of the Afro-Cuban music coming together with the African-American music being jazz and what came of that. Welcome to the Jazz Is MasterClass series at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. I'm Sekou McMiller, and I'll be taking you through the jazz history tree, but in particular, Afro-Latin jazz dance. In this first section, we'll talk about from Cuba to Harlem. There's no way to speak about Afro-Latin jazz, dance, or music without speaking about Cuba and without talking about New York City, and in particular, Harlem, where things were popping. And about a certain era in time, like in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and then what comes after that. In Cuba, there were many dances happening, a lot of social dances, but also in Harlem, it was the same. And we had what you know as the Cuban dances like danzón, and the rumbas, and also the Afro-Cuban folkloric dances from the Yoruba, also from the Congo. But then in Harlem, in New York City, we had the jazz scene, where you had Lindy Hop, swing, you had tap that came here before. So it was a huge jumping industry, or music and dance industry in New York City, in Harlem, like at places like the Savoy Ballroom or Small's Paradise, and a lot of the other clubs as well. So there was a moment, as you've seen in some of the other MasterClass series, when you spoke about the music of the Afro-Cuban music coming together with the African-American music being jazz, and what came of that. But always back then, these musics were associated or related to specific dances. And so as the music fused, so did these dances. And this new music that came to be that we called Afro-Latin jazz, or the mambos that happened in New York City, and then the cha-cha-chas later, and also the rumba mambos and every other kind of music that came after that. Each time it was related to a dance as well. So in particular, let's dig into like the history of these dances, and then we'll get to like our big Latin dance craze that happened in the 40s. So you have dances like danzón in Cuba, which was a popular dance, and also rumbas, which also was a popular secular dance as well, as also informing them were the Afro-Cuban folkloric dances as well. And this music, it was specific music and specific dances, you know. And then in New York City, as I said before, you had Lindy Hop, swing, and other dances that came out as well that were directly related to music, like things like the mashed potato, which came a little bit later, but there was a song called the mashed potato and a dance called the mashed potato. So it was in that whole vein of things that things were being created, and it was with live music. So as the jazz and Afro-Cuban dance scene, music scene got very enamored with each other and very excited with each other, like with collaborations like John Oposo, which was an amazing Afro-Cuban drummer, considered one of the best then or ever. And then you have someone like Dizzy Gillespie, who got together with John Oposo to create what they call the first Latin jazz song. You know, so this music, although it was very familiar to Cubans and also familiar to African Americans, it was brand new because it was the fusion of the two. So you had the Cuban drums and rhythms, and you had the overlay of the jazz arrangements with the melodic and the chord structures, and then also even the structure of the music with the improvisation. So then also you introduce a new style of dance, which also beckon to the former dances as well. So you had the advent of a dance called mambo, or the music mambo. Now, in Cuba, mambo was danced differently than it was danced in New York City. But you also got to think about the socioeconomic and spatial differences in these areas, even the climate. In New York City, these dances were danced inside of nightclubs that were packed and people dressed to the tens, and the nines and the tens, right? So they were in suits and like pencil skirts. In Cuba, these dances were danced in the street, in the salons, and it's hot. So it's very airy and wide and round. In New York City, it was danced in the clubs, like line dances, like in a line, linears to make space. Also, it was danced in like more restrictive clothing, so you couldn't be as loose and free. So you had to be contained, but still express yourself. Like with a tight skirt that goes down, that flares out the bottom, you can't do what you can do on the island when you're just like relaxed in a flowy dress or skirt. Also, in New York City, you had this huge jazz swing scene in Harlem. So unfortunately back then, you had a thing, segregation. So, but always in Harlem, everybody was welcomed and you had a lot of integration actually. So this is places where Latinos and Black Americans would interact with each other. So a place like the Savoy Ballroom, it was very common to come there and see people from all walks of life there dancing and living their life, whether it was swing or mambo or the jitterbug or whatever you have there. So within the dance of mambo in New York City, you had swing steps. You had something now that we call the cross by a lead, but back then they would say swing the girl out, which came directly from swing. And so then that also influenced the style in which these dances were done in New York City. However, in Cuba, where the mambo sound originated with a little bit of the jazz influence, because there was always this interaction between the U.S. and Cuba back then, especially the jazz musicians would go down into Cuba, into Havana and play. So of course that sound was there, but not as concentrated as it was in New York City. And when there was this, I think it was in 1938, one of the first mambo songs came about by Cachao, who was an amazing musician from Cuba. And with this dance, with this music became a dance as well. But the dance was totally different from the way it was danced in New York City. As I'll show later in a later episode when I do a demonstration of the dances, but it was a totally different dance, yet to the same music. Music traveled quicker than movement and dance and the people. The people and the movement is very much influenced by its culture, by its living, by its food, by its climate. And the music is just influenced by the people moving around. You don't have to move an entire culture in order to be music. So that music inspired New Yorkers differently than it inspired people in Cuba. And hence it formed New York style Latin dances, like the New York style mambo or New York style cha-cha-cha, or what they call the Palladium mambo, which I'll talk about in our next episode. During the time in which Cuba and New York were communicating musically and creating this brand new Afro-Latin jazz or Afro-Cuban jazz sound and movement, like by the greats like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, but also Chamaposo, Machito, Mario Balsa, Cachao, all these different names in music. At the same time, it was happening with dance. This conversation was happening and brand new movement and rhythm and expression was being created.